Okay, so this is the Just Transition panel session. Um, this is the agenda. It's a 45-minute session, so we should be done by 1:45. I'll give a quick overview of the campaign. I know some of you, obviously, are young leaders, you will have been in the whole thing, but some people don't know as much about it. We'll do panel introductions, explaining our backgrounds or why we're interested or why we've been invited to this panel. And then Kelly Jo will present some of our young leaders' recommendations. We'll give the panel a chance to comment, suggest things to strengthen them. And then there'll be Q&A open up to everyone. If no one has any questions, we'll go back to recommend more recommendations. So that's how it's going to go. So about what this project's been. So over the last few months, we've been running our campaign called Unite for UK Climate Action, which the aim of this was to bring together a group of young leaders all across the country who are volunteering to help us create a systems map of UK climate policy on the One Planet platform, which is a systems mapping tool amongst other sort of functionality. And the reason we wanted to do this was to provide a national picture of what each local government was committed to doing and wants to do to reduce carbon emissions and to adapt to climate change. So this process of systems mapping has helped us to identify the best practice across the country, because obviously it's such a fragmented picture, understand what gaps exist and identify opportunities to develop good actions or strong actions further, delivering co-benefits around health, nature recovery and equity. So yeah, as part of this process, we've worked collaboratively with young leaders to form these recommendations, which we believe government should be implementing to amplify their impact. Obviously, there's limitations of what local governments can do, but there are things that they can do which they have a lot of impact on, which we want to maximise or show how they can maximise. So yeah, ultimately, we want to encourage local councils, businesses and communities to work together to create and deliver effective joined-up solutions to the climate and ecological crisis, and create a regenerative future for everyone. Maybe could we just go around the panel now and just like say a few things? Donna, I think you're first on my screen.
Thank you, Tash. Yeah, I used to work in local council. I still work on a climate partnership with the council and with local businesses and the community. And I've been doing so for quite some time. So this is right up my street. And I'm someone who's been doing it for a long time and used to be in business as well. And this is so relevant. I work across all the One Planet principles and all the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and with Poor and Design myself have been pushing at the door of government to try and get them to look at long-term solutions to really key issues. So I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you for inviting me as the elder person on this panel. And well done for all the work, all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. Gigi?
Yeah, so I'm Gigi. I'm currently based in Istanbul. My background's in working in migration and refugee support, humanitarian assistance and displacement. And I guess in terms of just transition and climate change, migration is something that always has to be considered in terms of the diversity that the UK has. The level of skill set that these people come in with, and also the reasons for why they're displaced, and also the issues that the UK faces with host communities being receptive to the change is something that's very important, and climate change is one of the biggest drivers. I think there's an estimated 1.2 billion people will be displaced because of climate in just under 40 years, which is under 30 years actually, which is a bit crazy. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's really interesting, definitely, to have your perspective. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments. Oh, and Joe's here. Hey, Joe. We're just doing introductions, so if you wouldn't mind introducing to the group.
not sure he heard. Or Joe, do you want to introduce yourself very quickly, or you're having technical issues and we should carry on and come back to him?
Yeah, okay. Just chip in if it works. Khadija, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Khadija and I'm a second year biomedical scientist, medical student. So I'm going to be working, I was like working with the One Planet to map out the climate action plans for the last month. So I'm going to be presenting the results and recommendation for the outcome just transition.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Joe, have you got your audio sorted? Yeah, okay. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, my name is Joe Baker. I'm Head of Carbon Management at Haringey Council, and I'm delivering a net zero borough for the North London Authority, working with our community and businesses.
Thank you. Okay,
Apologies for the audio.
Oh, don't worry, it's
challenges.
fine. All good. We're sorted now, so. Yeah, Khadija, do you want to kick off
Yeah.
with your first recommendation?
Yeah, so there are 5 main recommendations for just transition, but I'm going to be focusing on 2. So the first one being sustainable and healthy diets for all. So I picked this one because across all of the climate action plans, there wasn't like much focus on it, like encouraging residents to shift their diets to a more sustainable, to like reduce greenhouse gases that are released. So according to LGA, the cost of treating obesity like related diseases is going to rise up to 9.7 billion by 2050. So I think one of the like main reasons is that is there might be like low income families or just less education or less knowledge about what is sustainable or what is healthy. So the question I wanted to ask was that how is the council planning to promote these schemes or these diets to residents, and also how are they planning to invest in like in low income areas or families that like need this sustainable and healthy and affordable diets the most?
So we just now, anyone who on the panel who wants to comment or like share some information, please just, yeah, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
So I think this is a really difficult and challenging part, because you've got to nudge people away from what might be quick, might be affordable, might be easy to do. And actually, and it all comes down to personal choice, and there may be cultural or other reasons why people have a certain dietary need or desire. We are trying to work with groups around it, though, but it's gentle nudging rather than a planned strategy. And what we're trying to do is to improve and increase access to allotment growing and well-being on housing estates, so that actually people can understand a bit more about where their food types come from. We've also had to we're investing in our community groups to enable cooking classes, because again, if you've got a limited time, you're time poor, actually cooking a meal of different types might be challenging. So again, we're working with our community groups and our cultural groups across the borough to enable them to understand a bit more about cooking. And we are trying to show the economics of it as well. But yeah, it is by far the most challenging one, I think. I mean, we're looking at procurement routes as well in the in terms of what the schools provide or where the council actually in control. But in reality, it's very few number of meals that we have this interaction, and it is the biggest challenge that we've got. Consumerism is the biggest challenge we've got in the carbon reduction agenda.
Donna, did you have something to add? Comment?
Yes, I mean, as an ex-councillor, I completely agree with Joe, but it's absolutely key. And we know that obesity is rising as well. And obviously the costs of that to the NHS We're also doing something similar in that we've got a large sort of trough and cold frame project. But the onus being on the council is quite tricky too. And recently we were working with doctor surgeries, and Tash was involved in that, trying to get them to encourage different paths for their patients. But also that is something that's quite tricky, because you don't want the doctor shouting at the patient about what they're eating. It has to be the carrot more than the stick. So but we're putting forward something that will then be followed by organic gardening within social housing, with these big troughs and that keep water within them. So I mean, I know it's a huge issue, and one has to look at all the consequences of it. But it's an absolutely brilliant question, and something that should be, I think, one of the main recommendations. It's got so many consequences for health and well-being as well.
Yeah, it's like an access question, more than anything. George, sorry, Gigi.
I'm not speaking from the perspective of the council, but I would just add, I think in terms of when people come into different communities, it's often accessibility to education, also resources is one of the biggest issues. I mean, lots of mixed ethnic population groups, there tends to be less access to sort of the fresh vegetable and food shops. It's normally slightly faster food. So I guess a slight, maybe like an addition to the recommendation and this point would be to just ensure equitable access, or try to ensure equitable access to education on the foods that should be eaten, and then also in terms of where you can get your foodstuffs, because if something is closer to someone and it's easier to get and it's cheaper, then someone would go for that rather than opting for sort of the more fresher foods, which tend to be a bit more expensive. And then that also increases poverty within these communities, and also shops will end up moving away from these areas, and then more fast food shops would move into those areas, and then it just becomes this sort of cycle of destruction that's quite difficult to break.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that was a great question, Khadija, or recommendation. We can look back if there's more anyone wants to add, but should we move to the next one?
Yeah, so the second one is green jobs and skills. So to transition to a more low carbon and a green economy, there's a need to develop skills for like employees to like develop green skills, and there's also a need to have more green jobs available. So, for example, remote working to reduce carbon emissions. So the recommendations from young leaders were that the economic development strategy should have a strong focus to create like new jobs in the green sector, and also to invest in green jobs and skills programs to develop skills and qualifications for employees. So that's like my questions, that what are the plans to work with businesses to create plans to help develop employees, or help develop students to to transition to more green jobs. And on the other hand also, how are they going to create new green jobs to transition to a green economy? If that makes sense.
Yeah, that was great. Also, what barriers might people face?
Yeah.
Cool, and there's people making comments in the chat. That's very good. We'll come to them after time. Yeah, who would like to start?
I would just quickly add, because I know that obviously I'm not a council representative.
Oh, you don't.
Outside. I would also just add in terms of sort of like accessibility as well to these jobs and those and margin. I think it kind of links also to recommendation number 1 in terms of vulnerable communities, but the accessibility of these sustainable economies and also green jobs to people who might be moving into the area, or might not necessarily be from the area, or they grew up in the area, but they might not be necessarily from the UK. And then what sort of strategies and mitigation measures are put in place to avoid discrimination against these groups and isolation of these groups, because at the end of the day, migration workforce is very powerful and should be used and mobilized.
I can go again if you want.
Yes, please.
So I think this is a better stronger narrative question than the food question, because people can understand the economics of jobs. People can understand the benefits of having a skilled labour force, and therefore the push factor of this is going to land better with politicians. And we often talk about green jobs and upskilling of the markets. We know that there are lots of jobs that will disappear in the next 10 to 15 years. Boiler, gas workers, combustion engine mechanics, all going to disappear as we transition away from those heat sources. So it's not just about new green jobs, it's about transitioning existing workforce into it, and therefore enabling them to come on the journey of a positive future rather than seeing it as a limitation for them. We also, as councils, are place shaping. So we know we're going to have to deep retrofit, probably 20,000 social housing roughly in each local authority area. Alongside that, we're going to have to deep retrofit 200,000, which there might be private houses, which there might also be in the local area. So we're creating a marketplace as well for these jobs to go into. And so what we're doing in Haringey, we're working with our educational providers and universities around us to actually target the SMEs. So we're actually physically going out to B&Q or Dewsons, where they get their materials from, giving them free access to free training for skills and upgrading. And then we're saying, if you go on these courses, we'll also guarantee you access to the works that we're proposing to deliver as well. So again, deep retrofit on our street properties, deep retrofit on our council estates as well. And then they've got a supply chain that they feel happy with, and it's all mapped out for them. And I think that is how we can do it. We can show them the prize, we can guarantee them access to the prize, and we can make a simple pathway for them to join us on there. And generally, we're targeting more the small and medium-sized enterprises, the sole traders, because the bigger companies are probably already on some of this journey already because they understand the marketplace. But it's the smaller traders that we've really got to focus on.
Donna.
Yeah, it's interesting what Joe said, but it's also some of those jobs are very transferable. I mean, I was at the Eden project recently where they have geothermal, and yes, it's only one, but under quite a few I think most of the hospitals around the UK have the perfect geology for geothermal, interestingly enough, and geothermal is fantastic for heating, which is what a lot of hospitals need. And they built that geothermal outfit, which from using gas engineers, and they were perfectly equipped to do that, and their skills were completely transferable. So just interesting that quite a few of the jobs that are being used now can be transferred into some new jobs. I mean, some exciting new jobs. I just a comment. I'm so excited by geothermal. I know it's expensive and doesn't suit everyone, but I thought that was an exciting prospect for sustainability.
Yeah, it is. Oh, I liked what Joe said definitely about how to transition jobs and how to bring people into the wave of change, like in a positive way, rather than making them feel like they're getting left behind or cut out. So that perhaps is something we can work into our recommendations, especially around green economy and transition. Should we go to the next? Because we're actually flying through these ones compared to other sessions. We're on it.
Sure. So the next one being nature for all. So there is a link between lower income residence areas, like have less green spaces than higher income residents. So how could the council fund projects that will improve biodiversity and nature recovery, but also give people access to these areas?
Yeah, again, this is so all of our just transition questions like coming down to access and involvement and equity. So yeah, an access question. That's a good one. I'm glad you raised it. Access to green and blue spaces. I know some councils have got strategies around changing for example, road space and access to green and blue infrastructure strategies. But I don't know if, Joe, if you've got any insight into what that process looks like or challenges with that.
So I completely agree that there is an unequal access to green and open spaces, and also street trees as well. I've got maps of Haringey. I've seen the climate risk maps for Haringey, and you might as well just use social economic data, because the risks align, and it's so similar to both those things. I think in reality, because climate change and flood alleviation and overheating risk, etc., is a more wider geographical impact, you have to accept that some people will have to pay more to pay for greening in other parts of the borough, because actually strategically it's better for everybody, and therefore there needs to be a bit of redistribution, I think, of wealth and greening factors across a geographical area. But it is very difficult. We also know that generally affluent areas can argue for and against because they have more time. They tend to be able to construct very loud voices, whereas some of the more socially economic deprived areas aren't time rich. They can't invest in these sorts of things or construct necessarily, because of the way that government is constructed, the arguments in the right way to justify improvements in their local geographic area. So we need to think about how maybe the state does think about more of an interventionist approach to ensure that strategically there is a better risk management of things in a changing climate. That said, though, the barrier will again be money, and what do we use the land for? Land, which is, garage sites or small greens, are prime real estate for development, and we've got a housing crisis at the same time. So how do we manage that? Do we, and again, the argument for putting social housing in richer areas is obviously often contested more vigorously by people who have access to legal frameworks and understanding of the planning system. So you can't even move the housing from one area to another part. It's lots of moving parts about it. I do think there needs to be a stronger regulation probably on density of housing and kind of 15 minutes to a green space. It's disappointing that the government has recently withdrawn that ambition from its structure, but I do think I think we need to kind of sometimes be a bit of a grown-up and take a big step and say, actually, we will show leadership in this, and we will require green spaces, and they'll need to be fit for purpose. They're not just like a green football pitch or something. Actual proper purpose, a woodland with a real gain for lots of aspects of it. But it's another challenging social economic one.
Gigi Ozona, do you have anything to add on this? And if not, we can go to, okay, good. I think we should open to a few questions in the chat, and then if we get through them, we can go back to another recommendation. So what's at the top? Ben asked, does putting a focus on avoided risk, such as reducing the heat island effect, cleaning air, and make investment in this area easier, because obviously delivering nature-based solutions not only delivers for nature, but improves risk, reduces costs down the line potentially, and also improves health outcomes. But obviously at the national scale, health is such a huge spend on budget.
I think it helps the argument, but the problem is we don't measure health in that way. So we can put lots, I could cite you scientific papers which say actually having a tree outside your window makes your educational attainment higher, and therefore you're more likely to get better grades at university or school. But we don't measure it. We because it's not cashable. And a part of the argument that we've got in this space, I think, is, carbon reduction. It makes sense economically, therefore we do it. Things like mental well-being, it's not quite as cashable. And even managing risk, we know we're heading really fast towards a brick wall, but we're kind of thinking it's all right, we'll solve it, and we're kind of running out of road. And but all we can do is construct arguments for it. And until the financial matrix that we use to measure impact and think about managing future risks changes, or we have a massive disaster which loses thousands of people and we have to try and compensate for that and try and think about what could we have learned, like Paris has done, or like Athens has done, or like Chicago has done in their heat waves, we will continue probably on a train of thought which unfortunately is not necessarily going to deliver the outcome that we scientifically we know we have to do.
I would suggest, like, even the heat waves last year, there was, I think, a few thousand excess deaths over those 40-degree days. So it's already.
No, there are, but that's manageable. You know, we've unfortunately just come through COVID and we've lost hundreds of thousands, and we kind of accept the data now. And oh no, another 5,000 excess deaths. We don't think about it as 5,000 individuals who may have been off it. We just put it as a statistic, and I think we've accepted it. But I think until we have that, it can be determined as this was the heat wave for 2 weeks in August in 2024. It was so hot, we had 100,000 people die, and they weren't necessarily vulnerable people. They were just people under the age of 5, over the age of 75, the most at-risk demographic. Until that happens, I can't see us actively going into this space. And one of the challenges is, again, it's not going to be equitable. If you are affluent, you could go to B&Q and you could buy an air conditioning unit, and you can probably afford the fuel bill to run the air conditioning unit for 24 hours. And you kind of hope the national grid sticks and able to deliver all the electricity before those air source heat pumps. That's going to for those air conditioning units, because that's the big challenge, I think. Unless that fails, we'll just kind of carry on, because it's not the people in power, and that's the challenge, I think. Until a media mogul is hit by an impact of climate change, we may not necessarily see the front page spread that we need to see.
I think just to add to that, one of the things is, I think when you talk about numbers of people, it's very difficult to fathom, like, numbers. You can guess like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 100. When you get over 1,000 or 5,000, it's very difficult to get there. I think more research should be done in terms of the linkages between health and climate change and education, attendance, and also productivity and work. There's a lot of stuff that happens, let's say, overseas, that is funded by the UK, which is supporting, let's say, education in low-income countries, but they're looking at the wrong indicators. They should be looking at things outside of education. There's a brilliant project which works on deworming children, and you would never think about deworming as something to do with educational attendance, but actually it was the most effective thing to keep kids in school. So if we can try and look at councils, researchers, people who are working on climate change and the importance of green spaces and health that is linked to this, if you can try and look at factors outside of your sort of traditional, what makes you stay in school, what makes these people be productive with their health, it might actually be quite effective. And I would say one of the biggest ways of arguing climate change is the economic benefits of it. I think with our change in powers that happen every sort of 5 years and the different council elections, everyone's sort of just focusing on the immediate fix, not necessarily the long-term future. But if we can try and prove, which is sort of being done slowly, but not really effectively, then it could have some sort of substantial impact. But I also agree, I think unless we are faced with some sort of catastrophic event, or maybe the catastrophic event happens overseas and we are faced with the influx of God knows what, because we're not very happy with all these people coming, then people would be would then wake up and sort of, how sort of the migration thing is like the fear, be scared of who's coming. But then I think if you can sort of attach the economic benefit to why it's important, then that's when people will listen, or governments will listen.
Sarah Deacon has been making some really good comments on the chat about the short-termism, which is not too different in local governments as it is in national government, where I was so shocked after 2 years. My party started talking about, well, the election's coming 2 years away. So we have to think about, things that are coming forward and whether it'll be popular to do them. And so yeah, they were thinking about whether it was good to to put forward a particular planning for a large development. And I just think it's shocking that, you know, and I was on for sustainability and climate, but, you know, when we know we've got a crisis, we should be putting, we should always be putting, in my mind, so which is probably why I'm no longer a councillor, we should be putting, you know, the planet and people far ahead of politics. And so that short-termism is exactly why we are in this situation that we are, because, you know, we're just going with what we think the voters want, without concentrating on what the real solutions are, and without collaborating. You know, there've been quite a lot of comments in the chat about things aren't joined up, and lots of different people are doing them in a similar small area, but there's no joined up thinking, which is why One Planet is so good in terms of finding out where the similarities are and then collaborating around those solutions.
Thank you. I think it's only 1:34, so why don't, Khadija, do you want to choose another recommendation? We'll go through it. I think we've got time. Also, all of these resources that are in the chat and the questions, I'll save, make available later on as well, so nothing will be lost.
Yeah, so the next one is no fuel poverty. So only a small number of the climate action plan that were targeting net zero targets, or they had net zero targets, included fuel poverty. Most were just based around insulation or providing energy saving advice to residents. So the thing is, no fuel. So if a new renewables fuel source is like comes up, or like is created, so the low-income household would be the last ones like to have access to it. So could the council like get into a legal obligation, or like have it with like larger energy suppliers to like enter them into a legal obligation to provide low income household with these energy resources, or like new renewable fuel? That'd be something a council could like do.
So access to sustainable
Yeah.
energy
Fuel, yeah.
sources, so potentially community energy groups.
Like making new legal documents, or like entering into new deals.
So I think we can only control as local authorities what we own. You know, so in Haringey, in reality, only 8% of the borough's total carbon emissions are under the direct control of the council, and that includes council officers, the schools, and the social housing stock that we have. 92% is owned by private individuals or businesses. Even if we looked at all the policy levers that we could implement, some of them would be very unpopular. We're only edging towards 20 to 30% of shaping the carbon emissions for the, again, so it's all for other people. But the council does have purchasing power, and we are probably the biggest single house owner in the borough, with our social housing stock, roughly 15,000 that we own, 20,000 that in total, 20,000 if we can include leaseholders, etc. So we can stimulate the market, and we can shape the market, and we can also show people, here's what you could win in terms of a deep retrofitted house, and what it could look like and how could it feel to occupy something like that. So we are looking at strategic partnerships, and we are also looking at infrastructure such as community heat networks across the whole borough, to enable the private sector to step into it once we've done it. We've done the heavy lifting, I suppose, and de-risk the project from their perspective. But again, unfortunately, councils at this moment in time are struggling financially, and we don't have a lot of levers to pull and resources to undertake. And climate change, one of the things that I find was weird is that climate change and carbon reduction isn't really a clear statutory function for a local authority. It's kind of a nice to have, and when you're cutting budgets, you get rid of the nice to have sometimes, and you keep with the statutory functions. Even if you accept long term, it's not sensible. You're thinking of the 4-year electoral cycle. So I think that's where we go. I mean, and because we are targeting the social housing stock, you could create an argument that probably those are the people who are more in need of financial support and help. Although probably some of our poorest families at the moment in Haringey are living in private rented accommodation, but funded by the government purse to enable that to happen. So there is a bit of a disconnect, but an opportunity to probably link them all together.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, Neve, do you have something to add?
I've not got something to add, but I guess I've got sort of a question. It's because that also as well something I've noticed that has come up across some of these different sessions is that, yes, local councils are kind of very much strapped for time, resources, money. And so obviously there needs to be more that is sort of, I guess, coming from actually the sort of national government, central government sort of perspective, whether that's statutory requirements or whether that's increased sort of funding for local councils. I was just kind of wondering, what are kind of some of the ways that either even just us as individuals, or maybe the collaboration of local governments can do to sort of lobby central government to try and get sort of more resources, support, I guess, at the local level on climate and things like that.
I have got a view. Do you want to go, Joe? Or?
No, after you.
Okay. Well, yeah, definitely not national, but I would say. But I think we've started to do things more things sort of up in a much broader footprint with the whole of our so like the whole county would get together to do something. So we're doing a big nature-based solution thing on. I'm saying we, although I sit on a climate partnership board that I founded when I was when I was a councillor, but now I'm apolitical and still sit on the climate partnership board, which is great because it was supposed to be apolitical. And but we're doing something that is across the whole of the county of Berkshire. And that works well because some people do things, some areas do things really well. And so we're sharing data that way and solutions that way. And funding as well. So that works quite well for biodiversity particularly. And yeah, and the sharing of resources, but also we've got Windsor Great Park that goes through 3 of the 6 of us, so that's useful. But I do think and another really useful resource, and I don't know how many of you use this. I mean, some people don't like it at all, but the UK climate scorecard is fantastic for looking at how to do things really well. If you look at if you go through it and look at what organizations have done particularly well at doing things brilliantly, because if you look at what the things are you could possibly be doing brilliantly, you know, even if you don't score well on them, you look at what the top number could be, and then you get what best practice could look like. Sorry, that was a long response, but so that's a good way of looking what best practice could look like for some, and then finding out from those organizations or those local authorities how to do those. That's a good way of getting up to speed quickly. Sorry. In my opinion.
That was good. We're definitely going to, okay, Ben shared the link to the council climate scorecards. We're also like sort of looking at the moment if we can do a piece of work with them. sort of joining up some of this young leaders' work with their work. Does anyone have a question from the audience I'd like to ask the groups? We've got a few more minutes. Sarah Deacon said that the climate scorecard's really helpful, showing transparency across the councils and sort of driving competition. I'm sure Joe's got some feelings about it. I think transparency, though, at One Planet is definitely something that we encourage councils and businesses to be transparent.
I like the idea of the climate scorecards, and I think the principle is right, but I know lots of authorities game it. I know that actually some of the questions that are asked, when I receive them, I don't understand the rationale behind it. You know, has Haringey Council in North London recently granted planning permission for an airport? Well, no, because it's North London, and we'd never get applications for an airport, and yet I get points for it. Well, that seems a bit weird. And there are some of the councils who have done quite well in London have accepted we don't answer it. The comms team answer it for us, and they tell the answers which they think they can put, and they can put some information on the website to make it look like we're doing stuff, and that's it. Whereas some boroughs who I know, who I would class as leaders in London, come in the bottom quartile, and I just go, don't have any clue about how this has landed, because they have done more LTNs, they have done more deep retrofits, they have done business engagement, and you're kind of thinking, I'm not sure. So I think the principle is right. I think it, though, needs to be a bit better audited and challenged on some of the basic assumptions of it. And I think it does have the potential to have massive sways on the political and reputational register for local authorities. But I've got a feeling that the last one landed badly with lots of politicians from across the spectrum, and therefore it's kind of a bit discredited. And I just wonder, therefore, what its future would be, because it wasn't as robust or as challenging in the next one. So, you know, I'm fully up for a discussion with the group. I'm fully up for sharing my insider knowledge, as it were. But I worry that it's a bit of a missed opportunity, and maybe it could potentially now do more harm than good in terms of shaping.
Just a quick additional question. Do you think it's like, you know, sometimes when things are signed, you know, people sign different conventions and different agreements. Do you think it's sort of like a race to the bottom in terms of like collective failure? Because if you look at the numbers on these scorecards, and I'm not saying that they're super accurate, because I know I was just listening to what you were just saying, but about half of them are below 20%. No, but below 25, 30%. So it's not like there's a huge gap between. So sometimes if you look to your neighbor and you see a council, they might be like, they're not doing that much. And then the other council's like, we don't have to either. So it's sort of like no one wants to be at the bottom, but people are happy to be in the middle. But the middle at the moment is below 50%.
I think there is a bit of that. As politicians, not that I'm a politician, they're always looking over that. What's our neighbour doing? They're ridiculously competitive, and therefore that will help. I also think if a lot of the scores are very low, you're kind of saying, well, we're losing aspiration here. We want to be, you know, it's easier to go, I think, if you're in the top half to the top, rather than saying, well, if we're all in the bottom half, well, that's where we all are. If there's an opportunity for you to win, people will push you harder. And therefore, I think some of the questions in the sheet were intellectually probably right, but it came out with an outcome which demoralized so many people. And that's the conundrum that exam boards have when you do it. And that's why you have to have that kind of weighting of to ensure that there's always some people that will get an A, there's always some people that will get a B, because otherwise there's nothing to aim for.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to see obviously how your council might be getting on, but sometimes this is sort of like counterproductive, isn't it?
I think it can be, yeah. I mean, we liked the first one because we were higher up on the list. We didn't like the second one as much because we were
I'm just
halfway
looking at
down.
my council and it's not doing very well.
Yeah, but I also I think, you know, I'm up for challenge. I'm up for things, you know, that we could do better. I mean, I think London has the Healthy Streets scorecard as well, which sets out this is where you've done well, this is where you do badly, here's some areas where we think you could improve. And it's a bit of a constructive feedback, but then that costs more time and resources to do, and that's the risk.
Or I guess really maybe a lesson learned from it is that councils maybe just need to be communicating a lot better what they are actually doing and making that information more easily available. Because, you know, if that information was easy to obtain and view, then I'm sure because also, Joe, I know that there are areas that Haringey scored low on, and I was like, well, I'm actively working on a project that's implementing that, you know. So it's just like, I guess really what it comes down to is just a lack of communication, which I think is actually really important. And it's one of the other recommendations that we've put in as an overarching one is just kind of better communication sort of on all levels, especially in terms of sort of co-benefits and things like that acting on climate can be. Sorry, Tash, sorry, because I know that we're running out of time, so I'm just going to hand back over to Tash to sort of wrap up the session.
Yeah, I think that the climate scorecards that's coming, it's primarily designed to be a communication tool, public facing, so the need for it wouldn't be there, I guess, if there was clearer communication and understanding between the councils and the public's understanding of what the council can do and can't do was better, than the need for it wouldn't even be there. So that's a good point, Neve. Yeah, we're going to wrap up this Just Transition session. We will be taking the comments from our panelists and the questions from the chat to strengthen our recommendations in our manifesto. And at 2 o'clock, we're kicking off our intergenerational event, which is our sort of big one we've been planning for months as the culmination of this piece of work. And also it will be talking about what we're going to be doing with all this work. It's not just stopping. It's like, okay, we've got to this point with this public resource, now what? And what we're going to be calling on for councils and businesses and local government and central government to do as a result. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us and giving us an hour of your time and your knowledge and insights. And yeah, it's really invaluable because all of the young leaders put so much effort in, so it's really great to have a bit of comments on it.